Luigi, the princess needs our help. We have to go to the Mushroom Kingdom.
Lead the way, Mario.
Right this way. Let's hop in the pipe. Here we go. Oh, Luigi, this place does not look like a Mushroom Kingdom.
Oh no, Mario. Where are we?
Look, that sign. It says Poveglia. Oh no, not Poveglia.
Mario, I'm scared. This place is spooky.
Quickly, to that bell tower over there. Oh, I'm breaking the bricks.
Oh! Oh, God! Oh, God! Damn it! Oh!
Mario, what happened?
Luigi, there's no coins in these bricks. Oh.
There isn't. Let's see. Oh, son of a bitch!
Oh!
Oh!
My head!
Oh, what kind of castle is this?
Oh, here! Take the mushroom!
Oh, thank you, Mario. Oh! Oh, he's black and moldy. Oh! Yeah!
What is going on with this place? What kind of princess lives in this bell tower? Come, let's go to the top. Oh, we've finally got to the top.
Welcome to my house of scientific horrors.
Who the hell are you?
I am the doctor, and you are in my domain.
Which one of Bowser's children are you, you mad bastard?
Hit him with the Koopa shell.
Good idea.
Ah!
Good hit. Now I give him that blue shell.
No!
Good working, Luigi. You knocked him off of the tower.
Oh! 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 God!
Oh, he's still alive down there.
Oh! Oh! Oh, God!
He broke every bone in his body.
Oh, Luigi, it's awful to look at.
Oh, God! Oh! Oh! Guys, if you look in my medicine bag, there's a mushroom. If you could just toss it down. Oh! Oh, God! Oh!
Oh, here's the bag. Here you go, sir.
Oh, thank you. Oh, oh God! That was a poison mushroom.
Take that, you son of a bitch.
Good one, Mario.
Well, Luigi, I think it's safe to say another job well done.
Another job well done indeed, brother.
Here we go.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you have arrived at the island, the haunted street of madness, the Creep Street Podcast. And oh boy, do we have a juicy one for you today. So get out those knives and forks, put on your bibs, lick your chops, and dig right in, folks, because we have a spooky one today. But before we get started, let me extend this foreplay a bit longer here and tell you where you can find us. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We're also on TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. And of course, baby, if once a week is not enough for you, you want a second helping of Creep Street, head on over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast for all sorts of goodies.
There you can get your just desserts.
Oh, that's right, baby. We're giving you the main course. Go get yourself some dessert over at the Patreon.
You got a sweet tooth?
That's right. Absolutely. Now, folks, listen. We've covered some pretty dang spooky places in the 5 years we've been doing this show. And I've got to tell you, some places, even if they aren't technically haunted in the traditional sense that we know of, there are some places where it's like such evil, awful things happened where it's just like, Ghosts or not, the land is almost just stained with that memory. It just creeps you out to even be there. And today is one such place. Today's episode is Poveglia, the haunted island of madness. That's right, we're skipping on over to Italy, to a little island off the coast of Venice. But before we get on that ferry, cross over to the island, let me get you ready with some sources here. My sources were The Evil Island of Italy by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe, Inside Poveglia Island's History of Death and Madness by Genevieve Carlton at All That's Interesting, Poveglia, More Than Ghost Stories by Renee Sindall at History Walks Venice, and, probably our most academic source, Ghost Adventures Season 3, Episode 2. You can actually check it out here in the States. It's on Max. So if you want to check it out, I mean, you got to get a dose of the baggins. You got to get some baggins. That's right. Now, folks, as I said before, we all know there's just some places in the world that seem to have a dark energy, and typically that's because they have a dark history, where the very atmosphere seems steeped in tragedy, suffering, and even pure evil. They're the kind of places that would freak you out even just looking at a postcard of the place. And when it comes to a locale that perfectly fits the mold for a haunted place, not just a house, or a haunted hotel, or even a haunted town, but an island. Poveglia Island in Italy is one such place. A place where the past lingers in the air like smoke, with a twisted blend of horrific history, misery, darkness, and the supernatural. Grisly past? Yup. Secret mass burial grounds? Ding dong, Poveglia's got it. A place of unimaginable human suffering and death? Oh, you betcha. Crumbling ruins and darkened abandoned buildings? Baby, Poveglia's got it all. And just to put a cherry on top of this shit sundae, there's even an abandoned asylum, where it is said the former inhabitants can still be heard crying out in the dead of night. Check, check, check. Poveglia Island is an unassuming speck in the middle of a beautiful lagoon, and has long been a twisted symbol of death, decay, and the remnants of suffering. If you're looking for the kind of place where misery and darkness seem to literally be in the soil, and we'll get more into that later, literally in the soil, Poveglia is that place. Often it is dubbed the, quote, world's most haunted island. This forsaken dot of land sits off the coast of Venice and has earned every inch of its grim reputation. From being called the, quote, island of madness to the cesspool of dread, this cursed rock is the very definition of a place where the dead, and maybe something far darker, refuse to stay buried. Welcome to Poveglia, the heartbeat of horror. The island sits, as I said, in the Venetian Lagoon, nestled between Venice and Lido, a stone's throw away from civilization, yet somehow the place feels lost in time. Its story dates all the way back to 421 AD, when its first inhabitants sought refuge from the marauding barbarian hordes that ravaged the Venetian shores. But peace was never on the menu, baby. These early settlers did not find the sanctuary they were hoping to find on this forsaken little patch of land. No, they found constant battle. The island became essentially a fortress, not of safety, but of survival. And those ragged souls were forced to fend off the relentless forces of chaos, their days consumed with bloodshed and terror as they struggled to hold back the barbarian tide. And this was no place for peace, only war, and a feeling of relentless doom would hang over this island for centuries to come. By the 9th century, Poveglia had been drenched in so much blood that it became the stuff of a legend. And amazingly, despite its violent past, the island flourished at the time, growing in population and even becoming a fixture of the Venetian landscape. But as the centuries rolled on, its fate took another dark turn. Venice was hit hard by the plague in 1348, and it was this island that some of the earliest quarantine systems were organized. In 1379, when the plague was popping up again, the island was seized by the Venetian government for warring purposes as well. The people who lived there were essentially displaced, and Poveglia was transformed into a military stronghold, a station for battling the Genoese, an enemy with whom the Venetians shared a history. The island was fortified with an imposing octagonal battlement, an eerie structure that still stands today as a monument of the violence that once ruled over that land. There are opposing arguments regarding the island's role during the Napoleonic Wars, with some claiming it was used by the English as a base for ambushing French soldiers. French shipwrecks do actually indeed litter the bottom of that lagoon, as the story goes that when French commandos were captured, they were brought to Poveglia, where they met a brutal, fiery end, burned alive, and a final act of cruelty. As the centuries passed, Poveglia lay abandoned, a forgotten speck in the Venetian Lagoon, its gore-soaked past left to history. That is, until the devastating wave of the bubonic plague came crashing through Europe, claiming millions of lives, leaving cities in ruins. And with the epidemic raging, the Venetian government, notorious for its strict public health policies, decided to use several islands in the lagoon as quarantine stations. Poveglia would become one of these infamous lazarettos starting in 1403. Which lazaretto, interestingly enough, I didn't know this. How I learned what that word was a number of years ago when Jack White put out a solo album called Lazaretto. And I was like, I wonder what that is, because I had never heard that word. Looked it up, and yeah, it was essentially a place where they would put, like, folks with leprosy. They would kind of quarantine them off, so you were sent to a lazaretto. It's because I was like, man, what is that word? So thank you, Jack White, for teaching me the meaning of lazaretto. In these quarantine stations, those suspected of having the plague were confined. Keyword suspected. They were held in isolation, often on the islands themselves, separated from the rest of society, until it was determined that they were free of the deadly disease. This quarantine period typically lasted 40 days, after which, if the afflicted were found to be healthy, they were allowed to return to their homes. And in fact, 40 giorni is where the term quarantine, I guess, derives from, which I didn't know. But on Poveglia, the story didn't end with the quarantine. For those unlucky enough to be sent there, isolation on Poveglia didn't just mean confinement. It meant almost certain death. Those who died on the island were buried in mass graves, the island becoming a resting place for a countless number of the plague's victims. The shadow of sickness, death, and abandonment would cling to this island for centuries. And as the plague raged on, the island's transformation from a simple quarantine station into a true hell on earth became inevitable. The island, once a refuge from the barbarian invaders, became a place of death for the sick and the dying and the hopeless. What began as a slightly unpleasant holding area devolved into a nightmare, a place where the doomed were cast away, left to waste away in agony, their bodies soon to be added to the ever-growing piles of the dead. During the worst years of the Black Death, the plague claimed an unimaginable toll. In the 14th century, Venice was a bustling hub of international trade, bringing in ships and goods from across the globe. Unfortunately, this made the island republic especially vulnerable to the spread of disease. After the death of Venice's ruler, Giovanni Mocenigo, in 1485, during another outbreak of the plague. This prompted the city to increase its quarantine efforts, establishing colonies on isolated islands where those exhibiting symptoms of the plague could be confined. The horror of this period cannot be overstated. Poveglia, along with nearby Lazaretto Vecchio, became a gruesome place where the sick were discarded with little care. According to historian Rocco Benedetti, quote, "It looked like hell. Victims lay 3 or 4 to a bed, often discarded while still alive into mass graves." The sheer number of deaths was staggering. To give you an idea, at one point, 500 people a day on the Lazaretto Vecchio alone would die. An estimated 80,000 souls were lost in just 7 months, and the Venetian Lazarettos, Poveglia chief among them, became infamous as putrid pits of suffering. Bodies were either hastily buried in shallow pits or incinerated in grotesque heaps. And the worst part? As the disease swept through, many were dragged from their families and their homes, sick, scared, kicking, and screaming, to face a final and torturous death on Poveglia's shores. And many say that the ashes of the dead literally seeped into the soil, and the island itself became literally like an object of death in and of its own. The conditions were unbearable. People who showed even the slightest sign of the plague, fevers, boils, coughing, whatever, they were shipped off to the island to endure a slow, agonizing death. And you have to imagine that there was probably many who were wrongfully labeled as being sick with the plague. I mean, come on, a cough? Like...
Right. I just had a cold.
Exactly. And, if you weren't already sick then, you were probably going to then get it when you were shipped off into quarantine with the people that actually did have it. So you're kind of like getting screwed.
Yeah. And at the time, I guess it seems insane, but they probably didn't know what else to do to stop the spread.
Right. Exactly. Especially back then, because there's probably you add on superstitions and all that stuff. Like, who knows their thinking process and all this. I mean, obviously, saving lives, but, at what cost, obviously. Especially if you're throwing those who are not even yet dead onto the burn piles. I mean, the image of that alone is just horrifying. Horrifying.
Hell on earth.
Truly, literally like hell on earth. And it's said that if you were close to the island, you could hear the screaming and wailing of its inhabitants. The conditions were often worsened by the terrifying doctors who would arrive dressed in their bizarre beaked plague masks. These masks, they would fill with herbs meant to protect the physicians from the miasma of death, but they only added a surreal twist to the horror they were living in. And as we all know, if you've seen a plague mask, it's one of the most iconic, spooky. The first thing that probably pops in your head when you see it is it's like a bird almost. It looks almost like a bird's mask, but it's horrifying. And then when you add what their purpose was for, I mean, it truly was horrifying. So imagine you've already got the terror of being sick, and then you got this guy. And let's face it, it's not like they had anesthesia, or you know what I mean? They weren't gonna put you out or give you anything really I mean, who knows how they were treated. And
they were more like undertakers than doctors.
Absolutely, you're right. It was more essentially like hospice care than anything. Only the worst possible kind you can imagine.
I wonder why they designed the masks to look that way.
The only thing I can imagine is that because it's got a beak, that it's like your mouth and nose are farther away. And then if you put spices and herbs in there I'm sure it smelled awful in these lazarettos, as you can imagine. Maybe that was too just to keep them from getting sick. It was also common that those who were still alive, like I said, would get tossed onto these massive funeral pyres, burned alive, sometimes even as their families watched in helpless despair. Because if you got shipped off with your family, like if your whole family was sick, if someone's worse off than you might watch them get burned on the pyre. What an awful, awful thing to even think about. The endless procession of bodies and cremation and decomposition left a ghastly mark on Poveglia. The very earth seemed to absorb the misery, its soil saturated with blood and suffering. And with Italy losing a third of its population to the plague, this island, and the other islands that served as the final chapter in the nightmare that never seemed to end, Poveglia was now a deserted island of ruins, its remains haunted by the souls of those lost to history and perhaps by something darker still. Even after the worst of the plague had passed, Poveglia's history continued to unfold. In 1776, God bless America, the island was once again claimed by the Public Health Office, which used it as a quarantine checkpoint for anyone or anything crossing the Adriatic Sea into the Venetian Lagoon. The island, however, wasn't just a checkpoint, it was a grim reminder that the plague could return at any time. And in 1793, when 2 cases of the plague were discovered aboard ships, Poveglia transformed once again into a confinement station, a place where the suspected victims were forcibly held until they either succumbed or were proven healthy. This cycle of suffering and death and quarantine didn't end until 1814, when the lazaretto finally shut down. But by then, the damage had been done. It is believed that over the centuries, Poveglia alone, this little island, became the final resting place for about 160,000 souls, men, women, children from every corner of Venetian society. By the early 1900s, Poveglia's ghastly past had already become legend. People were already freaked out and didn't want to go there. But its fate had not yet fully played out. In 1922, the island was repurposed once again, this time as an asylum for the mentally ill. And though they would hope that the decay of its past would be left behind, the air on this island still reeked of something foul. It didn't take long before the patients began to speak of the island's tormented past. They would claim to hear wailing voices that drifted through the halls and to see ghostly apparitions wandering the darkened rooms. But as with many things on Poveglia, these were dismissed as nothing more than the desperate rantings of the mentally unwell. Some even believed the island had always been haunted, even before the plague. And now, those spirits seem to have found new victims to torment. So yeah, imagine that. What an awful catch-22. Obviously, in 1922, their definition of mentally unwell, is probably different, or at least how we treat it. So you have that. So you have people that, by today's standards, would probably just be okay with some medication or something. They're on this island, and if they're really hearing ghostly voices, of course, what are you going to think when you're at an asylum and the person's like, I'm hearing voices? It's like, well, of course you are. You're in an asylum. It's like a catch-22. What an awful, sick joke in a weird way. It's like an awful trick in a weird way. What a hell. You could literally see a ghost in front of you and tell them, but because you are quote-unquote a patient at this asylum, you're just, they're just, a lunatic. You know what I mean?
You're trapped in the asylum and you're trapped in your own reality in a way because nobody believes you.
Absolutely. And honestly, that might be as worse a hell as any than not being believed. Now, as time went on, the island's grim reputation as a psychiatric hospital grew ever darker. One particular doctor, whose name has since been lost to history, became infamous for his cruel and sadistic methods when handling patients. He was a man convinced that lobotomies were the answer to everything. No matter what mental illness they had, this doctor performed horrific, inhumane experiments on his patients. He used crude tools like hammers and nails, drills and chisels, and he sawed and drilled into the heads of the unwilling patients with no scientific basis, no sanitation, no empathy. The goal, it seems, was not even to heal these people, but to control and have power over them. And still, as you can imagine, the haunting continued. And, we did our episode on lobotomies. And, as we know, monstrous practice, of course, a disturbing and disgusting thing. And, and as you can imagine, on this island, probably really unsupervised, this guy was essentially, he had his own, mad scientist laboratory. I mean, I think about, God dang, what a hell. Because whether or not you believe in ghosts, I mean, this place was, God damn, what an awful. And then for these awful things to keep as the centuries go by, it's almost like cyclical. It's like it just keeps coming back to this evil place, this like...
Yeah, it feels like it's like a place fated to be a place of suffering.
Exactly. And the way it's quarantined off, it's this little island.
Nothing good happens here. They tried to open an ice cream parlor. It was a rocky road, to say the least.
Oh, man. In fact, it's funny you said that because I just bought some Rocky Road today at the grocery store. So must be a psychic connection we got.
Must be.
Well, the most terrifying stories regarding this doctor and his activities happened in the bell tower of the hospital. It was there he conducted his most twisted experiments, locking patients in the tower and subjecting them to hours of excruciating pain. The screams of those unlucky enough to be trapped in the tower echoed through the night, mixing with the wailing voices that already filled the island. And for many, it was this horrifying combination of real pain and paranormal torment that made the island a place of unspeakable terror. Like we said, think about it. This is already enough of a nightmare without ghosts and evil spirits. But then if you add that on, there's truly no escape. And who's to say, too, that if you died there, that you wouldn't be stuck there in death? I'm sure that was like a fear in some people's minds, especially maybe the more you got to think there was like probably this terror of like, oh, Jesus, I don't want to, even if I die, like, I don't want to be trapped here. What a unimaginable, I mean, it's literally out of a Gothic tale, like a bell tower where the evil doctor does his experiments. I mean, it's literally like Frankenstein.
It reminds me a lot of Shutter Island, the idea of being in that hospital and the paranormal element. But I almost feel like this island is a metaphor for the history of hell. You know, it goes through this period of just massive death and decay and suffering, and then it becomes this prison. It's almost like evolution of a hell.
Right. It's not like, you know, someone bought it and put up condos. Yeah. It's like it went from one awful place to another awful place. It's like, Jesus, even just for the land's sake, give the land a break, for God's sake. Obviously the people, but gosh, give that island a break. Maybe give it a dock, a couple of jet skis.
Something.
God,
put in an in-ground pool.
Yeah. Maybe get a Bass Pro Shop out there. I mean, come on.
Little tiki bar?
Oh, that'd be nice. An Italian tiki bar, too, nonetheless.
Manja.
I mean, I guess if there's any justice, obviously it doesn't make up for the centuries of death and suffering. But if there's any sort of weird, brutal justice, it's that things did not end well for this madman doctor, who made Poveglia his own personal, like, playground of psychological horrors. The story goes that after years of torturing patients, well, he began to feel the weight of the island's malevolent energy begin to bear down on him. His nights were filled with terrifying hallucinations, menacing shadows, shrieking voices, and the unmistakable sense that something far worse than madness was taking hold of his mind. The doctor's grip on reality faltered, and soon he was a man driven to the brink of insanity. And as the legend goes, one fateful day, this doctor finally succumbed to the torment. He climbed to the top of the bell tower, his domain of twisted experiments, and either, depending on who you ask, he either leapt to his death or was thrown by an unseen force. Now, this is where it gets a little extra brutal, because apparently that fall didn't kill that doctor right away. It's said he lay there, his body, I mean, he was going to die, but it didn't just do the job instantly. So he's laying there, unable to move, probably nearly every bone in his body busted. And it's said that in his final moments, a strange mist rose around him, and this fog was thick, suffocating, and folks say it literally wrapped around his neck and strangled him to death, adding one final layer of horror to the doctor's already wretched existence. I mean, like I said, at least if there's any justice for the hell that this man inflicted, I mean, it sounds like he got his just desserts if that's true. Because even if you take away the mist part, the supernatural mist, I mean, the guy lay there and broken, probably in unimaginable agony, and slowly, God, that's going to make you think about your past.
Yeah. It's probably even still only an ounce of the pain that he inflicted.
Exactly. Right.
But yeah, gosh, what a cinematic, so many cinematic images this story paints in your mind. I mean, especially, it is poetic that he would pass in that way, but the accounts of the fog strangling him, whether it happened or not, it adds such a layer of intrigue to the entire story of this island, where he, one of the most cruel inhabitants of the island in its history, and for it to just kind of swallow him up like that, it seems so fitting.
Right. It almost sounds like the way, and this sounds at first like maybe it doesn't make sense, but how like the old Grimm's fairy tale villains used to die. Like, if you think about, like, as we're recording this, I haven't seen it, but like Snow White came out. I guess in the original Grimm's fairy tales, the evil queen is forced to wear these red hot iron shoes and dance until she dies of exhaustion. So it's almost like a end to an OG. It just feels like how like a Disney villain, and when I say Disney, I'm not saying kiddie. I just mean like that weird way how like this villain, the souls of those he tormented finally came to collect their due. And makes me think of like the evil queen or the evil someone being essentially dragged to hell by those they tormented. And
we've talked in the past too about how it seems like in the spiritual realm, a lot of the malevolent spirits feed off of malevolent energy. And this guy was as malevolent as it comes. It almost feels like the island was happy about finally getting him returning to the island's soil.
Absolutely. And as we will talk in a little bit when we get to more deeper into the modern day haunting of this island, obviously like most haunted places, like if people get near it, they will either hear a voice or something telling them don't, leave. And rather than, I think we quickly think of that as like threatening, but like maybe it's more like a save yourself, don't just go. Like you don't want anything to do with this place. Now, perhaps the most chilling part of this tale is some locals say that doctor's body was never removed. Instead, it's said his remains were bricked up within the very walls of the asylum, sealed away as both a punishment for his crimes and as a way to trap his tortured spirit forever with the island's decaying and haunted grounds. What's that famous Edgar Allan Poe tale, The Cask of
Amontillado?
Yeah, I remember we read it in school when I was younger, and yeah, the guy like gets bricked in with his wine because he loves wine or something, and he gets sealed in with all of his wine. It's almost like that, like he's getting sealed in with the house of horrors that he made.
Right. It's just even more justice. Feels fitting that he would be trapped there forever.
For sure. Absolutely. The asylum closed its doors in 1968, but even today, the ghostly remnants of Poveglia's dark past remain. A weathered, faded sign that reads, Reparto Psychiatria still marks the location, as a grim reminder of the horrors that unfolded within its walls. Now today, much of the buildings still stand, abandoned and rotting. Their barred windows are still there, and heaps of moldy, forgotten beds and rusted bed frames still litter the halls. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faint wailing of those who once wandered the hallways. Patients, tortured souls, even the lingering specter of a mad doctor who is said to still haunt the island, bound forever by the sins of his past. And I mean, let's not forget, on top of that, the many, many souls that died there before the asylum, when it was a lazaretto and whatnot. I mean...
Right. The amount of death there.
Yes. It's like it's concentrated in one area. It's so weird. It's like...
Yeah, it's like it's a place that like invites death.
Exactly. After the hospital was abandoned, Poveglia was largely left to decay with time, the earth taking over and the vines creeping across the island's grounds. The legend of the place, though, long abandoned, still calls to those brave or foolish enough to venture there. In the 1960s, a man purchased the island with plans to restore it, only to quickly abandon it, leaving behind only questions and rumors. Another family with dreams of building a vacation home on the cursed island similarly turned tail and left. They never offered an explanation, though some speculated that the island's horrific past surely played a part. In fact, one of the most disturbing stories about the island involves the daughter of that very family. It is said that while on Poveglia, she suffered a gash on her face that required 14 stitches to close. No one can say for sure how it happened. Some believe a violent, malevolent entity attacked her, leaving her with the physical evidence of the island's vengeful spirits, and the family never spoke about it again, and they never returned. The incident only added fuel to the fire of rumors surrounding Poveglia, making it clear that whatever force lurked on this forsaken island, whatever sinister presence remained, was not to be trifled with. Though it stands quietly today, the island is not a place of rest. It is a place where agony, both physical and spiritual, festers. From the moment people set foot on this island, they often report an overwhelming sense of dread. As though an unseen weight is pressing down on their chest, they feel an almost suffocating sense of despair. Some people even describe a deep, instinctive compulsion to turn back and run before they've even reached the heart of the island. Some of the most terrifying aspects of this haunting are the sounds. Tortured wailing and moaning rising from the dilapidated buildings, as if the very walls carried the sorrow of those who suffered there. And then, of course, there's the bell tower, where the devil doctor did some of his darkest deeds. Its bell is said to still toll with eerie regularity, though no one is ever found to be near it. The thought of a bell that once signaled death tolls now tolling again in silence, a haunted rhythm, is enough to freeze the blood in anyone's veins. Even more disturbing are the accounts of the voices commanding, telling trespassers to leave and never return. There are those who claim to have even seen shadowy figures darting amongst the ruins, moving quickly and with purpose, though no living person could be responsible for their presence. Once again, we see that as threatening, and I'm sure, given its history, say it is haunted, I would not be surprised if there are spirits there that are violent and are dangerous, but that feeling of wanting to turn and run, that might be the good spirits just giving you a sense of like, you gotta go. Maybe it's almost like they're scaring you, but like for your health, essentially.
For your best interest.
Right, exactly. They're doing it with your best interest at heart. But, unless you're like able to see these things and actively converse with them, how would you know? Maybe it is one of the more vicious ones, the evil ones. So, you certainly don't want to even tempt it. The psychics who have visited Poveglia speak of an energy so dark and malignant that it nearly breaks their spirit. These entities, they say, are not passive. They're not just passive, lingering souls that one might expect. No, these are angry, tortured spirits that are filled with malice and disdain for anyone who dares step on the island. The psychic energy is so overwhelming that most refuse to ever return. And that's another thing. When I was doing the research for this, I thought, even if they aren't necessarily one of the evil spirits, you can't really blame these spirits for being fucking pissed.
Yeah.
It's almost like, look, pal, you're still alive, asshole. Like, I can see both sides where, like, they would want you to visit, but I can also see why a couple of dudes with, a boom mic and a camera
Right.
trying to, provoke them. I'm sure there is an element of like, F you. Like, I fucking watched my family die, you asshole. You know what I mean? So
I was experimented on by a mad doctor. You're here taking selfies on a vacation?
Exactly. So it's like, it's no wonder that there'd be anger in these spirits, especially if you feel like you've been robbed of life. Many visitors report more aggressive physical manifestations, as if an unseen presence seems to take offense to the living even stepping foot there. The mildest of accounts talk of being brushed, nudged, or even shoved by invisible hands, though some describe being violently attacked by these malevolent forces, with bruises and scratches appearing seemingly out of nowhere, and the chilling feeling of being pushed or pulled by something they couldn't see. It's as if the very air on Poveglia is charged with hostile energy. Of course, like I said, we've got academic sources for this, folks. One of the most infamous incidents on the island happened to be captured on film, and you can actually go watch it on Max if you're here in the States. Popular TV show Ghost Adventures. As always, Zach Bagans he got more than he bargained for, baby, and I'm not just talking about cargo pants.
He got more than he begged for.
He got more than he begged for. Well, Bagans and Company in 2009 spent 24 hours stranded on the island hoping to catch a little something on camera. And almost immediately, their equipment went haywire, with strange readings blaring off the charts. And then came the malfunctions. Alongside these technical failures came the unmistakable sound of disembodied footsteps, unexplained voices, and the eerie glow of mysterious orbs floating through the frames of their camera. So far, this was obviously creepy, but it's the sort of creepy footage you'd expect from a haunted location featured on an episode of Ghost Adventures. But things got turned up a notch, and it got pretty weird when Bagans began provoking the spirits, as he does, as he's wont to do, speaking to them in Italian, no less. Suddenly, Bagans was seemingly under the influence of an unseen force. He begins to flail about, struggling as though something was on him. He's visibly shaken by it. I mean, well, the first thing that happens when you watch that episode in that moment is his buddy, I think Aaron is the other guy's name. You can see it looks like they're talking, and Aaron goes, "Me?" You don't really hear what Bagans says, but you can tell by his body posture that he looks angry. And he starts cussing out the other guys. Who's to say? But I don't know. It kind of plays with what I understand a possession to be. When I think of a possession, I think of something that is a, weeks, months, maybe even years long endeavor. Whereas, I mean, who's to say? I'm not saying it's impossible. I would think if something can possess your body long term, then I don't see why it can't do it short term as well.
Yeah, or maybe even it was attempting to possess him. He kind of went into a state of fight as of defense.
Yes, and that's a great point. There is a feeling when you watch that, let's just say, if we go on the basis that we believe what we're seeing, I mean, yeah, there does seem to be there's that one moment where he bends over, right? He's hunched over, he hits the wall. It's almost like he's fighting off, when you're really sick and you're I don't want to throw up, but I got to throw it. It's almost like that, he's fighting off
something internal.
Right. He's he's cursing at his bros, but it might not be because he's fully possessed, but maybe his body is entering a state of almost like a shock in a way, so it's your fight or flight. His body happened to go to fight in that moment, because there's also moments where they do run too. There's episodes where something happens and they will run like hell out of there. So yeah, it's an interesting moment. Gage, what did you think of that moment, that infamous Zach Bagans moment?
I thought it was interesting. I also thought, one of the things that it could be is just the stress got to him and caused, a temporary, and maybe they could have misconstrued those feelings as well. But it's hard to say, and like we talked about the history of this island is so just steeped in death that I'm sure it is a place of dread, just feeling of dread and probably anxiety, I would imagine.
Right. Well, and two, as we know, these things, it seems they feed off of negative energy. So, and who knows what maybe he was going through in his personal life at that time. Think about it, like that show is international. Maybe the shooting schedule, you're going from location to location. Maybe it's like we're on location 12 of 18 and like, I just want to fucking go home. He's probably jet lagged. And then he doesn't get a nice warm bed, even though he's obviously getting paid well and everything. Still, it's like...
And they already, honestly, they seemed really on edge even before that, too. They've been hearing strange noises in the building and stuff. I mean, I think that all kind of probably contributed, at the very least, just to the very stressful. So it could be a combination of all those things.
And it's actually funny because earlier in the episode when they're being... because every Ghost Adventures episode, it starts with them talking to either the people that own the place or just like work at the place. And, they kind of give them a tour. And if I remember correctly, they don't even step foot on the island, the guys that are, because they like don't want to. And in fact, when the guys kind of press them like, hey, you sure you don't want to spend the night? Like they literally deadpanned, like no humor, like, no. I've said no. Like literally just like they're not even, there's no humor whatsoever. They're just like, no.
That's
like
funny.
I'm not yeah.
That's like such the guy who is like, this is as far as I'll go, who takes you to the castle or wherever.
Exactly. Right. It's like the folks at the beginning of Dracula, the small village that Renfield goes to, or Jonathan Harker goes to in the book, Renfield in the movie. They literally are like, no, like don't. And like when he gets out of the horse and carriage to get picked up by Dracula's carriage, literally the carriage, the second his foot touches ground, boom, they're gone. They're like, I am out of here. It's kind of like that. They're literally like, let's get the hell out of here.
They're like, would you mind if we actually if you just jumped out as we go by? We really don't want to stop. Exactly. Or they just like, they literally have to parachute in. They like drop over it. Well, if you want to go check that out, it's on Max here in the States, like I said. Pretty interesting episode. And of course, Ghost Adventures is always fun. Season 3, episode 2, I believe.
I think so. And I've always, and I'll say this, I've always loved and respected those guys. Because even if it's like, my thing is like, who knows how much, is real or how much they... Now, I'm not saying the hauntings themselves are not real. I'm not denying that. But, if the content of the show, however, if it's ginned up a bit, even then, like, it's still, they've always been entertaining. That show has never not been entertaining. And it's amazing that they're still going at it today. It's funny because today, Zach Baggins is more like he'll still go to places, but now he's more like, because he's much older now, it's more like he'll do shows where, like, he'll tell other people about a place because he owns, apparently in Vegas, he has like a whole paranormal museum. I actually have a friend at Second City who went to it and said it was, super cool. There's a few famous like haunted artifacts. In fact, Post Malone famously visited and like saw something spooky, he apparently said. So fun stuff. Yeah, Ghost Adventures is always fun. It's so cool to see those guys still going at it. But whether the place is genuinely haunted or not, Poveglia Island is undeniably a place that oozes fear, with a sense of desolation just hanging in the air. The crumbling structures that still remain, which include an old church, the bell tower, the former hospital and housing for staff, administrative buildings, all in various states of decay. These once functioning buildings now stand like rotting giants with only the most half-hearted attempts at preservation. The island itself is a graveyard where ivy and weeds strangle the remnants of civilization. Inside the buildings today, it's a scene of unsettling abandonment. It's that kind of like, it's not liminal space. It's not like where that concept of where being in a place that's usually occupied like a modern office building. But there, I guess you would call it like a sense of like probably delayed liminal space because you're in a place that was once so active and here it's like you're seeing like the remnants. I don't know how to describe it.
I feel like it does fall into that liminal space. I think the liminal space is a pretty broad. I think I would even count places like that are very, very old that are now abandoned. I almost think of like even somewhere like the Colosseum, where you probably, you just are there and you look around and you feel the history that happened there.
Right.
Something like that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because come to think of it, if there's a place that you would think would be haunted, the Colosseum in Rome, just because it was literally a place of blood sport.
Yeah.
But you never hear, I don't know, maybe locals there know stories or ghost stories, but you would think that's gotta be haunted, right? Like the Colosseum. So. I would think.
Maybe, maybe hauntings, maybe that kind of energy dies off over time. What happens to all the haunted places when the earth is destroyed in however many millions of years? Maybe there's a statute of limitations on hauntings. Who knows?
Well, we've talked about if we go on this theory that a haunting is essentially energy, if the energy eventually dissipates, if it eventually, or it just goes elsewhere, maybe you're right, because Poveglia, maybe many of these ghosts, maybe they're the more recent ones from the 20s on up, from when it was an asylum.
Right. And honestly, maybe the more death that's there, the longer it lasts, too. You would think kind of somewhere with that many deaths and that much tragedy, maybe creates more energy.
Exactly. Maybe put up a stop sign, you know what I mean? It's like when a crossways gets too many accidents, and so they put in a stop sign. It's like, put a stop sign in.
Right.
Oh
or it's
God.
Like they had the nuclear meltdown.
Oh, Chernobyl?
Chernobyl. It's like Chernobyl. Let's just, block this off for a few centuries, however long it takes, and just let it die down a little.
That's actually a good analogy. Almost like a radiation in a way. That's a good way to visualize it. Is maybe the half-life of this, maybe it winds down over time, especially if it's not what we know is an intelligent haunting, if it's more of a residual haunting. Perhaps as the years go, maybe it kind of fades into the ether, essentially. Now, as you wander the island, you are essentially treading over mass graves. Occasionally, people have reported seeing skulls or bones poking out of the ground, or washed ashore or pulled from the waters by fishermen near the island. That would make sense. Especially if you get a rain and it washes some soil away, especially as shallow as many of these graves were described. I'm sure that absolutely happens quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure the graves were quite shallow, it being on an island.
Right. Currently, the island remains deserted, with its haunted history a chilling shadow over the tranquil quiet of the place. The island's vineyards have actually taken over much of the land. They actually do have grape vineyards there. The growing crops in an eerie contrast to the centuries of suffering that permeate the soil. And of course, sinister rumors and the bloody past that the place has seen, it sort of serves as a deterrent, keeping most people away. Fishermen, for one, avoid the island entirely. The only souls who actually go there are those who come to actually harvest the grapes. Whether they know the place's history or not, they certainly don't live there. It's more they come, do the job, and then leave. Can you imagine drinking that wine? I would be scared to drink that wine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It just feels like it's grown from death.
Right. And it's it almost feels like you're, in a way, the red wine almost becomes blood in a way. It's metaphorically, in a sense. I would not, the idea of it, even though I'm sure it's fine, it's just the idea of it alone is just God dang. That is just creepy.
What we're saying is if you drink that wine, you're a psychopath.
You're a psycho. You are a psycho. And you deserve to be sent to Poveglia. For those with a morbid curiosity, the island does offer a strange allure. And if you wish to visit, it's actually still possible. But according to my sources, they say be prepared for a bureaucratic nightmare. Special permits must be acquired, which is a tangle of paperwork all its own, and that's just to get a glimpse of the island. And even getting the permit is no guarantee, even if you do get it, because very few boats are actually willing to transport people there. So even if you get that piece of paper, that might still not be enough. Those that actually go there are few and far between, and I can imagine it's also a pretty penny to get someone to take you across. Yet, despite all these restrictions and barriers, Poveglia continues to attract thrill seekers and ghost hunters, drawn by its notoriety as, quote, the world's most haunted island. It's a stark contrast to the bustling, picturesque Venice just a stone's throw away, surrounded by resorts and tourists. It is kind of the dichotomy to think of such a beautiful place can also be, because here's the thing, I'm sure the island, if you were to remove all that stuff, I'm sure it's absolutely beautiful. I'm sure it's stunning. And it's like the dichotomy of like such grotesque horror in what is probably a beautiful area, beautiful land, like,
Honey, I want to go on a haunted honeymoon. Let's go to Poveglia.
yeah, let's go to Poveglia. And Poveglia stands as a reminder that sometimes the darkest places are hidden in plain sight. Many enterprising developers, though, still pine to develop the land. Even as recent as 2014, the Italian government, eager to ease its mounting public debt, floated a 99-year lease for the island, hoping to attract some potential buyers who would turn Poveglia maybe into a luxury resort, much like the nearby islands of Sacasassola and San Clemente. But as with most things tied to this place, these plans have encountered strong opposition. It's difficult to shake the air of doom that surrounds the place, and many of the locals are weary of the ever-expanding mass tourism that has already transformed much of Venice into a maze of luxury hotels and souvenir shops. They're resistant to the notion of another resort popping up on their doorstep. In fact, some Venetians are hoping to raise enough money to secure the lease and instead transform Poveglia into something more suited to the island's unsettling atmosphere. A recreational area where 2/3 of the land would be open for outdoor activities like camping or picnicking. Much more appropriate.
Yeah, why not just turn it into a haunted asylum theme park?
A condo? You heartless bastard! Put in a campsite! And I'm sure the locals, because one, I'm sure, like anything, I'm sure that makes their cost of living go up when you have all these luxury resorts go in. But two, there's probably an element of it that's like, no, respect the history here, the awful history. Like,
right, it's like bad taste.
It's bad, yeah. There's probably, I'm sure for some, they're like, that's in poor taste. But no matter how picturesque the concept may seem, the specters of the island's past haunt the very air, as well its decaying buildings, making it a hard sell for any potential developer. The ghosts of Poveglia, though, are as persistent as the rumors that swirl around it, and it seems unlikely that anyone will be eager to stake their future on land said to be cursed for centuries. Any attempt to turn it into a recreational haven or a luxury resort appears doomed from the start. And after all, it's hard to imagine anyone relaxing with a picnic among the ruins of plague burn pits, which is, when you think about that, you're eating your ham and cheese, you're like, oh yeah, that's where they used to burn the plague-infected bodies. Even though it's like, a millennia ago, it's still like, no thanks. Pass the coleslaw. When you hear of all the tales that surround the island, it's hard not to wonder if the island itself has become a living vessel of evil, a haunting, intangible force that is born from the collective horror that is soaked into the soil of the island. With all that's happened there, it would almost be weird if the place wasn't haunted. How many atrocities, how much suffering can one place endure before it is absorbed into the very fabric of its being? Could this pain and this horror congeal into something darker than just legends? Perhaps Poveglia is not only a reflection of its bloody past, but a physical manifestation of the suffering it has witnessed. A twisted, spectral force that lingers in the air just off the coast of Venice, with a malice that cannot be exorcised no matter how many years pass. The island's legacy is undeniable, and whether or not you believe in ghosts, it's clear that Poveglia has earned its place on the list of most unsettling cursed places on Earth. It stands as a monument to human suffering, and a place where the past does not stay buried. And whether you call it a haunting or a supernatural imprint, there's no denying that the land carries a weight that no visitor can escape. So is the island itself still waiting? The ghosts of its past lingering in every ruin, every overgrown corner, watching and waiting for the next chapter of its tragic history to unfold. Fiend. Or Finn, what do they put in
Finn.
French movies? F-I-N, Fiend. So Gage, that is our episode on Poveglia. I mean, what a bummer place, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But, I mean, it's kind of an epic tale in a way, too. It's a place of such, obviously, tragic things throughout history, but significant and spanning such a long period of time. And just, it's got to make you a little bit curious if it were easy to visit.
And also, that's another thing, too, is, right, if people were allowed to go there, would its cycle of carnage just continue?
Ah, yeah.
And think about this. As many horrible stories as we do know, think about even before the Doctor, when it was, when it was, the medieval days. I mean, there's no telling the violence, the just awful, despicable things that were performed there, like that probably are just lost to history, that no one even knows about. So it's like there's probably even as dark and nasty as the stuff we do know is, there might be stuff much worse that maybe it's even better we don't know. Yeah, especially when you're going back millennia to 421 AD. I mean, who knows what could have transpired there through all the wars it saw. I mean, when the English had it, apparently, if that is true, it says, some say, but if the English were there, I mean, think about that. It's not just the asylum or the lazarettos, but also it was a place of war. The water around it was for centuries a place of war. Here in the States, I mean, obviously we've had war here in the States too, between, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, all that stuff. But
much more recent history.
It's a much more recent history. And then, of course, think about all the history we don't know of that was never documented for the century, the eons before Europeans arrived. The thing, so it's like for every nasty thing you do know, there's probably tenfold what you don't. And, ooh, man. But anyway, I'll tell you what, Gage, I got a list of names I wouldn't mind getting shipped off to a lazaretto with.
Oh, yeah? Who's that?
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vieren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, ho, ho. Folks, we love you and we thank you. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night and goodbye.